Hi, I'm Jo Skelton. I'm the Senior Brand and Partner Communication Manager at Cambridge University Press, and we want to welcome you to our session on why publishing open access should be your first choice. So first of all, I'm just going to run you through a bit of housekeeping. So this is a Zoom meeting, so please, if everyone could mute your microphone. Any questions, please do add them to the chat box. We are going to have a Q&A at the end of the session, so we'll pick up any questions then. If you would like to unmute and speak at the end of the session during the Q&A, please feel free to do so. And also you will have noticed that we are recording this session, so just so that you're all aware of that. So today's session, we are joined by our three speakers. Firstly, Daniel Pearce, who is our Publishing Director for our Humanities and Social Science journals. Daniel is particularly focused on the impact of open research policies on the humanities and social science disciplines and navigating an open access transition that protects the integrity, character, and sustainability of this kind of research. Andrew Johnson is the Digital Projects and Open Access Editor for books. Her background in e-book development and project management gives her a complete workflow perspective to the world of open access books, which has allowed her to work cross-functionally to ensure the successful rollout of the new Flip It Open pilot. And finally, Andrew Sykes is the journal's marketing director at CUP. He has overall responsibility of the marketing of our open access journals program and institutional sales model, with responsibility for key projects to improve our author publishing experience. At today's session, Daniel will kick off with OA Advantage in journals. This will be followed by Andrew presenting an overview of our books and elements program. Andrew will then bust some myths around OA, and you may have heard, apologies, and we'll take you through OA routes available to you. Finally, we'll have the opportunity for a Q&A session, and if there are any questions that we can't answer during the session, or we run out of time, then we will follow up with a Q&A document. So, with that being said, Daniel, if you can kick off on the OA Advantage.
Thank you, Jo. We're going to begin by talking a little bit about to what extent publishing open access is advantageous to authors. And I'm going to begin by talking about some evidence from our journals program at the press, and then Andrew's going to follow and talk about similar evidence from the book side of our publishing. If we move to the next slide, Jo, and we're answering this question: do authors gain an advantage by publishing gold open access? Next slide. So by way of context, as you can imagine, open access is becoming a much more significant part of our publishing operation every year at the press. You can see in this chart the trajectory. Back in 2019, 14% of our research article publishing was gold open access. And so far, depending on how you slice and dice the data, we're running at around 36% of our research article publishing being open access. So the trajectory is relatively steep, and we're expecting that trajectory to continue over the next few years, driven largely, or at least principally, by the development of our transformational read and publish institutional agreements, which are bringing a much broader spectrum of authors into open access funding and making it a viable, a feasible choice for many more people. Next slide, please, Jo. So a lot of the data in this presentation is from a data set that looks at 18,000 articles that the press published in 2019. And this chart, it shows sort of an aggregation and an average of that entire portfolio. And it looks at the 12 months, the usage accumulated over the first 12 months after publication of each of those 18,000 articles. And when you put it together and average it out, you get these lines. And the dotted line here represents the average accumulation of usage for a non-OA article on our list within that data set. And the bold line represents the equivalent figure for the gold open access articles. And whether you choose to use mean or median, whichever is your preferred average, and that's the gold and the blue lines here, both of them really tell the same story, and that is that the open access articles are generally receiving about 3 times the usage on our platform within the first year after publication. And that advantage is immediately apparent in year 1, and it continues through to year 12 in this data. So interestingly, the top 5 articles in this data set were all open access, 7 of the top 10, 46 of the top 100, which is significant given that only 14% of our publishing in 2019 was gold open access. Next slide, please, Joe. If we drill down to subject level, you can see that the pattern is slightly different in different subjects, but really across our spectrum of publishing, all of our disciplines are showing a usage advantage for open access articles. There's no particular difference between HSS and STM in this data. What you're looking at here specifically is the gold bar represents the proportion of articles in that field that were published open access in that particular year. And then the dark blue bar is the proportion of usage in the data set that's attributable to those articles. So the extent to which the blue bar is bigger than the gold bar represents the extent to which open access articles are outperforming their non-OA counterparts in the same subject area. So there's lots that could be said about this, but the headline is that it is across the board at the press, no particular distinction between HSS and STM. Next slide, please. The downside to those 2 charts that I've just shown you is that they're both based on just 1 year of data, which isn't very much at all. And it's really difficult to get longer time horizons in open access because we just haven't been publishing open access at scale for long enough. But if you go down to a sort of a much more micro issue-based level, you can extend the window to about 4 years. So that's what's happening here. Each of the charts that you can see represents an issue of a journal that we published in 2017, in which we published some gold OA material and some non-OA material. And the gold line represents the average accumulation of usage over 4 years for the OA articles, and the blue line represents the equivalent for the non-OA articles. And then we just repeat it time and time again and get lots of charts that all look pretty similar. And they all show these 2 very clear patterns. One is that the OA articles outperform the non-OA articles in the same issue. And the second is that the advantage, the OA advantage seems to expand over time. So even in year 4, the gap between non-OA and OA articles is increasing. And so this is the longest time horizon we can see in our data, and all the evidence is suggesting that it will continue beyond 4 years. This is very sort of small sample sizes, they're individual issues, but the great thing about it is you're comparing like with like. It's the same kind of material published in the same journal in the same issue at the same time, and then you can repeat it for lots and lots of different issues and see those patterns arising over and over again. All of the charts on this particular sheet are history journals, but if we move to the next slide, Joe, you see if we do the same in political science, you get very similar charts, certainly expressing those two same patterns. And if we move to the next one, then you see the same in the life sciences. Really anywhere where we do this research, we're seeing quite clearly these same patterns emerging. So we feel like there's quite conclusive evidence that there is a prolonged and substantial usage advantage for open access articles. If we move to the next slide. Our evidence for citation advantage is much weaker. It takes a little bit of time to accumulate citation data, and we're working obviously with much smaller numbers than we would be with usage. But we are beginning to see sort of weak evidence emerging. This chart is based upon a subset of those 2019 articles published earlier in the year. So we have a 2-year citation window that we're looking at here. And you can see that there is a trend towards greater citation for open access articles in both HSS and in STM. Unhelpfully, for this particular chart, the blue bar represents the open access the blue bar represents the open access articles. The gold box plot represents the non-OA articles, which is very confusing. We've got to change that. But the point remains that you can see that the interquartile range for the blue open access box plots is larger. Interestingly, there's a sort of a quirk here where it appears that the impact is very small, or in fact is not present at all in the lower quartiles, so the lower 2 quartiles for HSS and the lowest quartile for STM, which suggests that if your article is underperforming within its field in terms of citations, then being open access is not necessarily going to be a massive advantage for it. But as soon as the article does begin receiving citations, then those citations expand, multiply if the journal is, if the article is open access. So this is by no means conclusive, but it is at least weak evidence that points towards a citation advantage for gold open access articles on our platform. Next slide, please. This is the same data but broken down by subjects, so you can see that it spreads across a fairly broad spectrum of subjects. But there is an advantage here for STM, a stronger citation advantage evident for STM. But that could be simply because this is looking at a 2-year citation window, which is very short indeed for humanities and social sciences. It may take a little longer for the citation advantage to appear in the data. Next slide. Final piece of data here. Thanks to Altmetric, we're able to look at lots of other kinds of activity around journals. We could see that, again, looking at that 18,000 article data set from 2019, the open access articles on average receive 61% more citations, 185% more likely to appear in the news media or on blogs. They were 52% more likely to be referenced in policy papers. Next slide, please. So all of that data comes together, I think, to paint quite a profound picture, at least corroborating from our own data the evidence that we're seeing from other research on OA advantage, to say that there really is an open access advantage for authors publishing gold OA, that it is applicable across disciplines, in HSS as much as in STM, that it's substantial in scale, particularly in terms of usage. It's substantial in scale and it's prolonged over time. And we're beginning to see evidence that increased readership is resulting in actual scholarly advantage, more citation, more debate, more discussion, more policy impact, more public impact, broader audiences. So at the Press, we're monitoring this data and we're taking it very seriously because this is exactly what we exist as a publisher to do, especially as a university press publisher, to support scholarship in this way, to support the authors that we publish in this way. And these are material outcomes that we're seeing in the data. And it means that really, in a way, irrespective of the context, the pressure from funders to pursue open access, although that environment does make for a much more conducive environment for making this change. We are on a path, and we are pursuing a transition to both equitable and sustainable open access for as much of our publishing as we can, simply to deliver these benefits to as broad a spectrum of authors as we possibly can. Next slide. This is the last one from me. So this is the really important point about all of this, that I use those two words, equitable and sustainable, when talking about the open access transition. What we're really interested in at the Press is figuring out strategies to deliver open access that works for all authors, delivers these benefits to a really broad spectrum of authors, because these advantages are undermined if they're only applicable to a limited few, or they perpetuate disadvantages already faced by the academic precariat, by independent scholars, or by scholars in the global south, or by early career researchers. And so this is primarily why we're driving our open access transition through read and publish institutional agreements. By way of example, back in 2018, almost all of our gold OA publishing was from a privileged small set of authors who had access to major grant funding. In 2021, 75% of our open access publishing is through read and publish institutional agreements. And within that is a much broader range of authors, different career stages, working at different types of institutions working in different disciplines from different, a much broader range of regions in the world. And so we've made massive strides in the last few years towards increased author equity through the method of the institutional agreement. And we're certainly intending to pursue that further in the years to come and be flexible about how those models develop in order to bring as many authors in as we possibly can. The other word I used was sustainability. And again, the advantages of open access are undermined if they limit author choice because they make certain kinds of journal publishing unsustainable, or if they undermine the quality of the editorial process, the peer review process, or the author services that we're able to provide. So the press is also very interested in sustainability and establishing models that will work in the long term, that will work at scale, that will deliver sufficient revenue to properly support those activities. Two final points. One linked to sustainability, and that is that we're pursuing this transition through gold open access rather than green. And the reason for that really is about sustainability. We don't see green as a long-term sustainable and scalable model for provision of a full open access academic economy. And that's simply because green open access leaves journals reliant still on paywalls and subscriptions to finance what they do. And so we are pursuing gold open access models, but we're trying to develop different forms of gold open access that are accessible to a much broader range of authors. The other thing that we're really worrying about is the operational element related to open access, which is simply the question of trying to make it easy for authors to choose open access. We all know that navigating this landscape is incredibly difficult for authors. There's a great deal of jargon, there's a lot of complexity, there's a lot that can be misunderstood, there's a lot of difference between different publishers or different stakeholders and the way that they talk about open access. And there's a huge amount of work to be done around that area, which I know that many of the people listening today are very interested in and involved in, and certainly that is a high priority for the press as well, as part of making open access work for the broadest possible spectrum of authors that we can. I'll stop there and pass on to Andrew to talk about books.
Thanks, Daniel. And that, I guess, is a perfect segment into books, because the landscape of OA books is, I'd say, not as far developed on many fronts as the OA journals landscape is, especially around what Daniel mentioned now here at the end. The options available to authors and understanding what those different options are. Whether it's funding models or how to publish them, and the information that's available out there. So for us at the press, very much, we're very focused on driving our open access book publishing and elements publishing, but we want to, similar to journals, find a sustainable open access model that we can really grow open access in a sustainable way. And it is very much still a time of experimentation. So that's something that I'll touch on. Joe, if we can have the next slide, please. So what I'm going to share with you today is a bit of research that we did on both our open access books and Elements program. So Elements is our short form publishing program, and even though it acts quite differently, in many ways, Elements are similar to books in how they're used and consumed. So it made sense to kind of group them together here. And the kind of data that I'm going to show today is, as well, we did this data over the first 12 months of usage, but we looked at titles over a longer time span because we don't have that many OA published books and Elements yet. So we looked from November 2017 to November 2020. Now, something to point out here, you'll see that I added here, we had at the end of November 2020, we had 59 open access books and 7 open access elements. Quite interestingly, the books, I actually just checked just before this, we now have around 120 open access books and elements. We have 15 open access elements published. So that kind of gives you an idea of the growth that we've seen just in the last 12 months around open access book and element publishing. But the percentage of books and elements published open access compared to non-open access is still quite small. But despite that, from our data that we looked at, we do see that publishing book or element open access does increase usage quite exponentially. So on the book side, it's between 11 and 66 times higher than non-OA books. And I know that's quite a range, and I'll explain in a minute why we kind of have that range. And on the elements side, it's 3 times higher. Now that might not seem that high, but elements also is quite unique in how we present it and how it's made available. So I'll go over that as well. Joe, if we can go to the next slide. So if we look at our usage for open access books versus non-open access books, you can see that the usage is exponentially higher for open access books. And the reason why we have these 2 kind of bars here for open access usage is because on Cambridge Core, our non-OA books are accessed on a chapter by chapter level. So they're downloaded as individual chapters, and each of these are logged as a usage. And on the open access side, we actually make the whole book available as one PDF. So you can download the whole book. So the first or the middle column that you can see is if we just take that one download of open access book and compare it to all of the usage for an average non-OA book. So you can see that's where, you know, the usage is already a lot higher. But if we look at it a bit more realistically and say every book has about 20 chapters, so that's 20 downloads per book, and compare that to our OA usage, you can see the usage jumps up quite exponentially. And I think this is really interesting in if we think about how books are consumed and how they're used, because these books downloaded, the OA books downloaded or accessed as one file might be consumed a lot more. If we can have the next slide, Joe. If we look at this on subject level, as I've mentioned, we don't have that many open access titles yet, but even in the subjects that we have, we see an exponential higher usage. The yellow is our OA usage in these various subjects. And as you can see, this is across HSS and STM subjects. So once again, our usage is much higher than non-OA books, even if we only look at them as one download compared to 20, say, downloads for a non-OA book. If you can go to the next slide, Joe. On the elements side, the reason why I said it's slightly different is because elements are made available, freely available for the first 2 weeks of publication. And this is very much done in the spirit of openness, and it's very much part of what Cambridge Elements is. So we thought it would be interesting to look at what the usage is of an element that's both OA and non-OA in those first 2 weeks, and then comparing it to how usage either grows or goes down over the next 3 months. So the 2 non-OA elements that we kind of highlighted here these were our our highest selling, our most downloaded, most used elements ever. I think machine learning had something like 20,000 downloads within the first 2 or 3 weeks or something like that. It was amazing. But you can see that in those first 2 weeks, obviously the usage is very high. A tweet also goes out, letting people know that the element has been published, and it gets shared quite a lot. Then usage starts going down over the next 2 weeks after the free period closes, and then the usage kind of bottoms out. It's very consistent. However, for our OA elements, which are treated exactly the same, 2-week free period, a tweet going out, we sometimes, with some of them, see a bit of a spike in the first 2 weeks, but then we see the usage grow little bit by little bit as time goes by, and this might be because the tweets are still out there and they keep on being shared, but essentially we see a much more consistent and sustainable usage growth in these elements than just having that first 2-week free period. The PB professors, picture book professors element over here, actually, it was published at the beginning of 2019, and it's still in the top 5 of our most used elements, and we have over 500 elements published at this point. So we're definitely seeing it also having a very good effect on our elements as well. Next slide, please, Joe. So elements are divided into series. So that's where it's a little bit of a hybrid of journal and a book. And we thought it would be also interesting to see how the usage for elements in a series, where some of them are open access and some of them are not, how that compares. So our first series here, the Publishing and Book Culture series, is a HSS series, and then we have our Paleontology series, which is STM. And we had one title in the Paleontology series that was very popular and had most of its usage in that first 2 weeks. However, the one open access element we do have in the series is, as you can see, our second highest usage for all the elements in the series, and we keep on seeing the usage grow for this element. On the Publishing and Book Culture series side, we can see that the usage of all of our open access elements is relatively quite a lot higher than any of the other elements in the series. Usage is quite consistent across all of the others. So once again, it's definitely boosting the usage of these elements, but also having these open access elements in these series, because the series are very much linked to each other, also provides for promotion of the series and other titles in the series. Which is something we still need to look into a bit more, but I think will definitely grow and be quite interesting to look at as we go forward. If you can go to the next slide, Joe. So as I said, I think on the book side, we still have quite limited data. Some of the stuff that we want to look into more is the comparison between non-OA and OA title sales and that kind of thing as well. But we want to find a way to make open access book publishing available in a more sustainable way, because we know that funding for books is quite tricky, and especially in certain subjects, there's not that much funding available necessarily. So one of the pilots we've launched is a pilot called Flip It Open, and basically we are flipping a number of our standard monographs to open access monographs as soon as they reach a certain sales threshold. And this is in conjunction with institutions and with libraries. And I'm not going to go into it in detail now. Tomorrow, my colleague Ben is going to look into it a bit more and talk about how it works, as you can see over there. But I think this is very much what a lot of publishers are doing around open access books. The difference is that we are trying to find a way where the funding of these open access books isn't an extra burden on libraries. It's we want to integrate it with what's already being done, but make it possible for more authors to publish open access. Next slide, Joe. And that brings me to a really great case study for one of our titles that's been included in the Flip It Open pilot. And basically our author, who is based across Nigeria and the US, was publishing an amazing, really important book about, Nigeria. And when she told her authors, they said, well, we won't be buying your book. And it's completely understandable, considering the costs that, institutions and academics in the global south have to pay for access to content. And then she was approached and we to include her title in the pilot. And I think what's really great about this is that the pilot, the Flip It Open pilot, is making books available, open access, without putting that funder burden on the authors. As the author says, publicly funded research is in many ways inaccessible, especially to certain groups around the world. And if it's research published about those areas, they should be made open. So we're really excited to see how the title does and eventually flip it to be open and make sure that this content and more content like this, which wouldn't traditionally get a lot of funding, open access funding, can be made more open to more academics and more researchers to access as well. And I think with that, I'm handing over to Andrew.
Fantastic, thanks, Andre, and thanks, Daniel. So, as Daniel and Andre have sort of illustrated there through their various analyses of our own publishing, open access brings many benefits to authors, readers, and to the funders of academic research. Removing that barrier to access of a subscription or a purchase paywall really opens up these kind of important research findings far beyond the sometimes quite siloed parameters of the academy and allows access to anyone in the world with an internet connection. But as has been made clear, I think, through some of the points made by Daniel and Andre, this is a new and very evolving way of publishing, and it's fundamentally changing and challenging, actually, a model that's been in place and serving the academic research community for decades, if not centuries in some instances. So in some disciplines, often those with a funding stream from organizations that have a strong mandate for open access, the model is widely adopted already, and many of our authors are passionate advocates for OA. In other disciplines, though, where the funding has been less forthcoming or funding bodies are less focused and preoccupied by open access, the pace of adoption has been much slower. And I think that to many authors in these areas, the benefits of OA and the routes to funding they might take are much less clear. But we firmly believe that the benefits of open access should be open to all researchers, and we see it as a key part of our role and our mission to work with institutions and funders to help educate our authors and make that process of publishing open access as streamlined and as transparent as possible. So to that end, I'd like to just round up our session by focusing on some of the key myths or misunderstandings that we hear most often from our authors around open access. Next slide, please, Joe. Thanks. So yeah, the first of these is that actually a lot of authors really fail to see the immediate benefits of them of publishing their research as open access. I think they often feel that it's more of an administrative burden that's being imposed on them by their funders or by their parent institution than a model that can bring real benefits to their work. But we've seen in the data presented by Daniel and Andre, the huge increase in usage that OA content gets. And for journal articles, roughly 3 times higher on average than their non-OA equivalents. And we're also really pleased to see, I think, what Daniel described as that sort of prolonged and sustained usage advantage for OA articles. It's not just a quick, immediate spike on publication tailing off. It's long, healthy growth. Similarly, there's evidence, again, as Daniel illustrated in our data, that this strong usage also leads to increased dissemination and impact. So it's not just eyes on papers, it's papers getting used and research getting disseminated. So we're seeing that evidence of a positive citation impact in our data, and there are numerous industry-wide sort of reports and studies that report, on average, OA articles receiving at least 18% more citations than non-OA articles. I actually think that's quite an out-of-date stat I'm using there, so it's probably much higher now. And we see similarly positive signs in the less traditional measures of impact. Social media mentions, user mentions, blog mentions, and policy paper references too. There's also some analysis that shows across the industry that indicates OA can be a real driver for international collaboration amongst researchers. There's a data set that I think the Digital Science Group presented a while back that really highlighted that researchers based in countries that have a strong OA mandate were evidently collaborating much more widely with their international colleagues than those that didn't have that mandate, which is a really interesting and perhaps unintended consequence of the original model. Next slide, thanks, Joe. So it's true that with the rise of open access, there's been a corresponding rise in instances of predatory journal publishing, an exploitative business model or scam, really, in which fake journals charge authors a fee to publish their article with no intention of providing any of the expected services like editorial guidance or peer review in return. And for ourselves and for the vast majority of our reputable competitors, the quality of the content we publish remains of paramount importance to our long-term sustainability. It's imperative to us that our editorial processes and our rigor remain at the heart of everything that we publish. So all content that's submitted to us for publication under an open access model goes through the exact same process of peer review, editorial board scrutiny, advice, and acceptance criteria that our traditional subscription-based content has always gone through. We draw no distinction between the two content types, and the business model end of open access, the payment of the author processing charge, or APC, is kept completely separate from the editorial process and plays no part whatsoever in the decisions that our editors take about the validity or otherwise of the research we publish. Next slide, please. And the final thing that we hear a lot, probably more than anything else, is that open access is too expensive for me. So as I mentioned earlier, many of our authors in some of the less well-funded disciplines we work in, particularly in areas of the humanities and social sciences, where those significant research grants from large charitable foundations just aren't as forthcoming as they are in some areas of the sciences. Those people in those areas feel that the biggest barrier to their going away is a financial one. We had a recent survey of authors that we put out from across the disciplines we publish in. 76% of those respondents strongly agreed with the statement that open access publishing is progressive and should be encouraged. However, the same cohort, from that same cohort, 54% agreed with the statement that OA is too expensive. So our authors see the value in the concept of open access and are behind it, but can't see beyond that perceived financial barrier. So as Daniel mentioned, it's a key priority for us, and particularly on the journal side of our business right now, as that's where most of this is happening, to find new business models that all of our authors we work with can use to publish their articles open access. So we offer some options for APCs to be waived, particularly for papers by authors based in lower income countries. We partner with an organization called Research for Life that you may be familiar with, which is an organization dedicated to providing access to academic content and services in parts of the world where finance is a real barrier to that. And we either waive completely or significantly discount our APCs for those authors. But our biggest priority by far, though, is really to work with our long-standing institutional customers, the university libraries who have always provided access to journal content through the payment of subscriptions, to put in place publishing agreements which allow faculty unlimited options to publish OA in a broad range of our journals. So-called read and publish deals, or more commonly now, transformative agreements. Next slide, please, Joe. We've got over 100 transformative agreements now across the world, covering more than 1,000 institutes in 30 countries, from Europe and the US to Africa, Asia, and Oceania. Now, our strategy that we're actively working on now and over the coming years is to convert as many of our traditional journal subscription-based customers to this model as possible, as quickly as we possibly can. And if you're based in an institution that has such a deal with us, you've got the opportunity to publish your work open access in almost any of our journals without having to pay an APC. We've worked with your institution on an agreement that repurposes some of the money that they previously spent with us on subscriptions to fund the APCs for authors in our institution. So from the perspective of the author, this is OA publishing free of any financial barrier to them. Next slide, Joe, please. Which I believe is my last. So you may or you may not be aware that we have such a deal in place with the University Library, which means it's possible for anyone from the university to publish their article with us without being charged a fee. APC costs for OA publishing with us have been met centrally, arranged by the UL, directly with us. So I would encourage any of you interested in publishing your work under the open access model to find out more and take up this opportunity. So far, around 77% of authors from Cambridge who published in our journals have done just that. So if you've already published an article with us over the last 2 years and hadn't realized you could publish OA, please do get in touch and we can look at converting your article retrospectively too. There are really comprehensive details on the open access agreements page on the University Library site, which is I've put a link in the slides, which I think these slides will be circulated. And we also have an eligibility checker on our platform, Cambridge Core, which allows you to look at which journals are included in the deal that Cambridge has with us. I think over 360 of our titles, which is about 80% plus of our list, represented in your deal, representing the majority of subject areas we publish in, so there's a lot of choice. Anyway, I will finish there, and we hope you found this as a useful and engaging session, and we'd love to hand over to any questions that anyone might have.
Sorry, just pressing all the buttons there. So if anyone has any questions, you can drop them in the chat. Or you can switch on your microphone if you wish to say them. While they are doing that, I just thought, Andre, you might want to explain elements, because I think that's probably more of a brand that we use, that it might be good to just say exactly what an element is to everyone.
Yeah, sure. So I mentioned very briefly, it's our short form publishing, but Elements was launched in 2019, at the beginning of 2019, and we call it a hybrid between a book and a journal. Essentially, it's a short form book. However, Elements are published in series, so that's why I kind of talked about the series themselves. And there's a variety of them, as you saw, stuff about paleontology, we have earth sciences, all kinds of series. And Elements are published, they kind of have to link to this series. They have series editors, which are our external editors, and they manage all the authors of all the individual elements, and these elements just get added to the series as they grow. We have some of the series that are coming up to almost 30 elements in a series, and they'll just keep on growing until at some point we decide we need to stop and create a new series. But yeah, that's also may just point out that it is a digital first product, so that first 2 weeks the elements are freely available. They're only available on Cambridge Core, and the print, the POD paperback publishes 2 weeks after the digital edition. And then it's available obviously in print and in third-party ebook on your other retailers as well.
Thank you. I thought I'd also just ask, you mentioned that there are a lot of predatory publishers out there with open access, and that's like one of the, obviously has affected how people look at open access. And is there a way that people can check whether or not the publication might be a predatory journal?
Yes, there is, Joe. I'm just frantically Googling because I can't remember the name of the organization. If Daniel or Andrew remember, please leap in. But there is a, is it called Stop Check? I'll pop it in the chat, but there's a site that you can go that is maintained independently, and you can go and check whether the journal that you're interested in is predatory or not. But yeah, I'll pop it in the chat in a minute.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, on the book side, it's a little bit different, where we've not we haven't, but it does come up where authors, if they publish their articles OA, for example, not through a publisher with a reputable kind of OA program, these books sometimes get kind of swooped up by also predatory OA publishers, and then they kind of repackage them and make them available, which is also something that does happen, and that's something that we are very aware of. And when a title is published with us OA, we make sure to kind of still protect that part and make sure that doesn't happen. So yeah, it's also there's a few of them, and I can't remember their names, but there are a couple of those kind of predatory OA book publishers out there as well.
Thank you, Daniel, for posting the link, and the Office of Scholarly Comms. I think the Office of Scholarly Comms themselves have quite a comprehensive page on this as well. Yeah.
Yes. Perfect. If there's any other questions from the audience? If not, maybe just a final kind of question, Andrea, around like the books program, and just like obviously with the case study, it was really positive. What have the reactions from other authors that have published OA that are either part of the program now or that have previously published open access with Cambridge? Has there, what are the feelings around that from the author perspective?
So I mean, we haven't had specific kind of feedback from authors necessarily, but I think the increased usage is obviously a big advantage for a lot of authors. I think the big challenge on the book side is the lack of funding in some of the key subjects that we should be making titles open, and so it would that's why the Flip It Open pilot is so good, because it's making that kind of content available, and it's very much geared towards usage and the fact that our most used content should essentially be open. So on the book side as well. So yeah, I mean, in general, We've had feedback from, on the pilot itself, we've had feedback from the likes of Martin Eve and some others in the open access world saying this is the kind of model that is very innovative and should be adopted more widely, because of the fact that it doesn't really ask for anything different. It just says, let's use that community spirit through the libraries to fund more open access publishing for books.
Perfect. I think if anyone has any final thoughts, or are you happy to leave it there and we can finish early unless there's any final questions? I can't see any questions coming through, so no? Brilliant. Perfect. So thank you very much to the three of you. You can also follow us. I've added the our social media tags onto the final slide, which we can circulate afterwards. And I'll also just quickly pop in the chats a link to our open access section on Cambridge Core, which has all the author resources that you would need. If you need any other ones, there is a chat functionality or an email address, I should say, so you can inbox us if you feel there anything that is lacking on the author side that you need to know about. And if you do have any questions, please do pass them on to the Office of Scholarly Communications or to the University Library, and they will contact us via our reps. And thank you all for joining us, and thank you to Andre, Daniel, and Andrew.
Thank you all.
Thanks
Thank you,
so much,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.